Welcome all, it's a delight to have you with us once again. We truly can't thank you enough for your support and subscriptions over the past few weeks. We're utterly blown away and quite thrilled to see so many new faces joining us on this epic journey. This week we return to what was once ominously known as the Hopper Room. With the departure of that great green beast, however, it shall henceforth be christened the Boiler Room. Here we found ourselves facing a Herculean challenge. The removal of a biomass boiler that we conservatively estimate at 250 kilograms, though in truth it probably tips the scales nearer 300. Archimedes himself might have raised an eyebrow, and we soon realised that some very lever-shaped ingenuity was required. We even had additional muscle on standby, you know who you are, just in case physics or our backs failed us. Along the way we also reopened a long-forgotten doorway, breathing life back into the house's old bones, and with heavy hearts we had to bid farewell to the king. First things first this week, the last of the copper pipework had to go. The biomass boiler room had been utterly colonised by a jungle of redundant plumbing, all taking up far too much valuable real estate for absolutely no gain. Watson set about bleeding the final dregs of water from the storage and pressure tanks, before removing the last of the pumps and pipework from the wall. Now Watson would never admit it, but in the process he managed to give himself what can only be described as a half-drenching. Alas, the camera missed this golden moment, but the evidence was irrefutable. The floor had suddenly acquired the sheen of a shallow pond, and his shirt bore the look of a man who had been caught in a very localised indoor downpour. As ever, he made short work of the task, dismantling, stacking and squirreling everything away for later use, even down to the pipe lagging. We shall, after all, have miles upon miles of pipes to insulate before this house is done, and every scrap will be needed. In true Dartmoor Diaries fashion, the weather was of course working against us. A storm was due on Sunday night, so this was merely the gentle prologue to what was about to arrive. The task Watson set his mind to was the reinstatement of the old back door. If you look closely, you can still see the ghostly outline of where it once stood. Over the years it had been bricked in, then half-heartedly reopened to squeeze in the very equipment we now found ourselves attempting to extract, and then promptly sealed up again. So, it was time to undo history's patchwork, reopen the doorway properly, and, in true fashion, ensure it was not merely engineered, but over-engineered, as is our way. Thus the old back door would stand once more, ready to serve its original purpose. Watson set about drilling, cutting and chiselling out the upper breeze blocks, removing them one by one as they came free. We would dearly love to show you the footage of the bottom half being removed, but alas, before Watson had even queued up the camera, he found himself standing beside the wall pondering where to begin. A gentle tap with the hammer later, and the whole lot collapsed promptly to the ground. When the doorway was half reopened, presumably during the installation of the hopper, a lintel had been added halfway up to support the opening for the pellet auger to pass through from one space to another. Sadly, rather than being executed with any degree of masonry finesse, the gap had simply been stuffed with whatever came to hand, hardly a solid structure, but by now this sort of discovery has become common practice in this house. So, moving swiftly on, Watson cleared the upper breeze blocks, which were at least properly keyed in, before adding an acro prop. After several rounds of sweeping away the inevitable dust and debris, while carefully salvaging every breeze block and any other potentially useful oddments, Watson turned his attention to the walls themselves. The original outside wall was prepped first, ready for its new lintel, followed by the inner cavity wall. With the mortar mixed and waiting, the lintels were set neatly into place. Then, trowel in one hand and mortar in the other, Watson set about gluing it all firmly together with the sort of satisfaction only a builder with a fresh bag of mortar can know. Trowel by trowel, Watson worked his way across the doorway, carefully persuading the bricks to be on speaking terms with the lintel and vice versa, with as much precision as he could reasonably muster. Watching him, I couldn't help but wonder whether he was in fact practising for a future in oil painting. He's been threatening lately to buy a vast canvas, open a box of paints, and attempt to capture the rather magnificent vista across the moor. Now, Watson hasn't painted since school days, but back then he was something of a dab hand, so perhaps this is all part of his training montage. I may be enabling this new artistic bent. A few weeks ago, during one of my ill-advised auction flurries, I purchased a pristine Winsor & Newton easel. Nobody else seemed remotely interested, so naturally I felt compelled to give it a good home. It now waits, with the rest of our worldly possessions, in limbo, ready to be unleashed once the house is habitable enough to accommodate both art and artist. On reflection, perhaps I should be getting that out sooner rather than later. With the lintels now securely in place, Watson added the final brick beneath and pressed it home with a ceremonious dollop of mortar, before fussing over the finishing touches to the inner cavity. At this point the doorway, and indeed its entire structure, were 110% back in place, which is mathematically impossible but deeply reassuring nonetheless. Earlier in the day, Watson had jackhammered out the old floor in this location, which was unbelievably uneven. As part of this, he cleared away the rubble from within and slipped a sheet of builder's poly into the gap to serve as a damp-proof course. With that in place, he set about mixing up the cement and filling it all back in. Once again, with his freshly honed trowel, or should I say palette knife skills, Watson smoothed the first layer of floor to something approaching artistry. I, however, could not resist arriving a few moments later to add my own contribution, a small scribbled message in the wet cement. Alas, there wasn't nearly enough room to attempt another dragon as featured in our Raid-On episode, but I did manage a modest signature and date. It won't be around for long, Watson will be back with a finishing layer soon enough, but for a short while at least, it was there. With the wind picking up but the sun shining bravely on, we set about our Great Archimedean challenge of the week. Now that the hopper had been removed and the original back doorway reopened, we could finally attempt the extraction of the biomass boiler and its formidable water storage tank. There was absolutely no way either object could have entered, let alone departed, without the doorway being reinstated, and certainly not through the original wooden hopper doors, which were never designed with such monsters in mind. So the task at hand was to apply a little Archimedean logic and get on with it. Our chosen method? To build a sort of railway track from scaffolding poles. After all, most things, despite their sheer weight, will happily slide on a shiny surface if enough force is applied. Watson laid down 2 of the longer tubes, positioned the correct distance apart, and secured them with the top rail and clips, ensuring they remained perfectly parallel. The top rail was cunningly placed to allow each object, once free, to change direction by 90 degrees at the granite wall and continue sideways into the courtyard. One scaffold pole was sacrificed to create 3 stout rollers, which we used in rotation. The rear roller leapfrogged to the front as the load advanced. In short, a method as old as civilization itself, very much like the Egyptians hauling blocks for pyramids, or even the cavemen before them, dragging their treasures across logs with similar optimism. Once we had inched the water storage tank to the doorway, it was time to tip it carefully onto its back where it was already resting on the rails, ready for its grand exit. We were determined not to open the doorway any wider than absolutely necessary, so the plan was to make use of the width already reclaimed at the bottom half of the opening, and bring the tank back through in precisely the same manner it must once have entered. And that was that. Off Watson went, sliding the tank through the doorway with the help of the rails, until there was enough clearance on the far side to stand it upright again. Still undeniably heavy, but obliging enough to glide to exactly where we wanted it. Once through into the hopper room, it was a simple matter of rolling it sideways into the courtyard, where it now sits discreetly covered and raised up on breeze blocks. Now for the main event, the 250kg biomass boiler. This was the true test, and certainly the moment when we needed a little assistance from history's old friend Archimedes. As he once declared, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the world." Well, we had a place to stand, and while our challenge was not the entire world, it was something heavy enough to make us wish for a lever of cosmic proportions. I wonder if Archimedes had the same problem with his own boiler back in the day, though I suspect his was marginally easier to manoeuvre than ours. With lever in hand, otherwise known as our trusty crowbar, we worked our way around the boiler, slipping in progressively thicker pieces of wood until it was raised just high enough to slide the scaffold poles underneath. Once at that stage, Watson wedged himself between the boiler and the wall of the house, pushing it bit by bit along the rails until it reached the main poles, poised to carry it outside. It then required another bout of levering to lift it once more, stacking yet more offcuts beneath until we'd gained enough height to roll it from one set of poles onto the other. Once everything was in position, Watson queued up the chain and block, or block and tackle, depending on your preferred terminology. The water tank had glided obligingly along the rails, but it was highly doubtful the biomass boiler would prove so cooperative, nor, frankly, did we wish to expend that much brute energy or risk the inevitable injuries such enthusiasm usually invites. So, the block and tackle was prepared, the boiler strapped with a towing rope, and the whole contraption connected. The coach house stood firm as our anchor, and off Watson went for the final pull. Out came the boiler inch by inch, with our slightly oversized rubber duck perched proudly on top, as though directing the entire operation. We repeated the same process as with the tank, manoeuvring the boiler onto the side rails and sliding it fairly easily down into the courtyard. The main scaffolding poles were then removed from inside, the boards lifted out of the way, and the smaller rollers pressed into service to ease the boiler off the track and make it more mobile. It was rolled across the courtyard to join its counterpart and, with surprising ease, lifted up onto breeze blocks. Both now sit neatly off the ground, tucked within the courtyard, safe from the elements, for the time being at least. The only question left is whether we keep them for some future practical use, or send them to auction for others to make something of, either practical or creative. We'll ponder that for a while, though not too long. The courtyard is destined for far grander plans than playing host to a pair of boilers. The following day, we popped down to B&Q to see our new favourite acquaintance, James, who very kindly helped us wrangle an order of OSB for the new boiler room. Now, before anyone says anything, it's well known that you either adore OSB or have absolutely no appreciation for it whatsoever from an aesthetic perspective. You've probably guessed which camp we fall into. It really is the Marmite of building materials. There's something oddly satisfying about its patchwork of shades, shapes and slices of timber, a sort of collage in structural form. It's a brilliant product, not only for adding strength to roofs and walls, but also, when you're feeling brave, for using as a feature in its own right. I won't reveal exactly what we're planning just yet, that's for next week's episode. But suffice to say, we think it's going to look rather good. Well, at least we think so. After 17 years of reign, we are heartbroken to share that King Mush passed away suddenly, without warning, on Sunday night. We are beyond devastated, as he had travelled the world with us. He will be missed beyond imagination, but we are comforted knowing he lived the most extraordinary life, full of love, joy, and adventure. With that, we bid him a fond farewell, until we meet again. A king in fur and whiskers worn. In memory of King Mushroom, he crossed the seas with silent grace, from Hong Kong's lights to Aussie space, then crowned himself on Dartmoor's throne, a gentle king, but not alone. 17 years of regal reign, through sunlit naps and window rain, he ruled with purrs and steady gaze, a quiet soul who lit our days. We dreamed of more steps, more sun, more years of play, more midnight runs, but time, it bowed and closed the gate, and left us here to mourn our fate. Yet what a life, so full, so grand, with every poor step close at hand. He lives in hearts, in fur we find upon the couch he left behind. So rest now, King, your journey done. You chased the stars, you caught the sun. Forever loved, forever near, our royal cat, our treasure dear.